My daughter inherited $33 million and threw me out of the house. 3 days later, she was begging for my help. She didn't know that 33 million was mine to begin with, and I had proof. Sometimes in chess, a pawn gets promoted to queen, but sometimes the queen realizes she's just a pawn on someone else's board. This story has more twists than a 7-card poker hand. If you've ever felt someone stole credit for your work, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because what's about to happen will change everything. But I know a secret that Tori doesn't. My name is William Brennan. Most people call me Bill. I'm 62 years old, and 3 days ago I was homeless. Not broke homeless. Legally homeless. My own daughter, Victoria, Tori, inherited $33 million and decided her old man was excess baggage. The call came at 3:42 on a Friday afternoon. I was in my workshop in the basement of 1247 Maple Drive, the house I'd lived in for 30 years, when my phone rang. "Dad, you have 72 hours. Her voice was different. Cold, like talking to a stranger wearing my daughter's vocal cords. "Tori, what are you talking about?" "The movers come Monday. I'm having legal papers drawn up. You need to sign a quitclaim deed." I set down my soldering iron. "This is the house you grew up in. It's my house now. Uncle Patrick left me everything, and I'm not running a retirement home. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore." She hung up. I stood there in my workshop, surrounded by 30 years of projects, inventions, half-finished prototypes, circuit boards I'd designed in the late 90s, patents I'd filed when Tori was in elementary school, the smell of solder and old electronics, the smell of a lifetime spent building things. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter had just inherited a technology empire built on innovations, and she was throwing out the innovator. But here's what Tori didn't know, what she couldn't know, because I'd kept it buried for 20 years. That $33 million inheritance? It was built on my work, my inventions, my stolen legacy, and I had proof. Let me back up. Tori wasn't always like this. Growing up, she was brilliant. Harvard MBA, sharp as a tack, but somewhere along the way she got seduced by the idea of money as status. When Uncle Patrick died 6 months ago and left her Brennan Dynamics, she changed, started talking about restructuring her life and eliminating inefficiencies. Apparently I was an inefficiency. Patrick Brennan was my older brother, 7 years older, charismatic, the kind of guy who could sell ice to Eskimos. He founded Brennan Dynamics in 2004, built it into a major player in wireless technology, sold it last year for $33 million. That's the story everyone knows. Here's the story nobody knows. Patrick didn't invent anything. I did. Back in the late 90s, I was working on wireless communication protocols in my basement. Not hobby stuff. Serious innovations that would eventually become industry standard. I filed patents between 1997 and 2003. Prototypes are still down there, covered in dust but functional. Patrick was struggling then. His first startup had crashed. He was divorced, drinking too much. I felt sorry for him. When he asked to borrow some of my designs for a presentation to investors, I said yes. Family helps family, right? That was 2004. He never gave them back. Instead, he incorporated Brennan Dynamics, somehow got those patents transferred to the company, and built an empire. For 20 years, I watched my brother get rich off my work while I stayed in my basement workshop, tinkering with new ideas, too proud or too stupid to fight. Patrick always promised he'd make it right eventually. He'd slip me money sometimes, 5,000 here, 10,000 there. "Just until I can figure out how to give you proper credit," he'd say. I thought he was planning to come clean when he retired. Then he died of a heart attack at 69, and I learned the truth. He'd left everything to Tori, not me. Not even a mention in the will. Just my daughter, inheriting my life's work without knowing it. The funeral was 3 months ago. Tori spent the whole time talking about her new responsibilities as owner of Uncle Patrick's legacy. She'd always loved Patrick. He was the successful uncle who took her to expensive restaurants and bought her cars. I was just Dad, the basement tinkerer who smelled like solder. After the reading of the will, she started making changes. First, she sold the company, $33 million, cash. Then she started optimizing her living situation. That's MBA speak for kicking out your father. But here's what Patrick took to his grave that Tori doesn't know. In his final months, he was acting strange, nervous, making phone calls at odd hours. going through old files in his study. He came by the house twice, looking agitated, saying he had unfinished business to settle. I thought he was just stressed about his health. Turns out, it was his conscience. The thing is, Patrick might have stolen my work, but he wasn't stupid. He documented everything. And 3 days ago, when I was packing up my workshop before Tori's movers arrived, I found something that changed everything. What Patrick carried to his grave wasn't what I thought. The legal papers arrived Saturday morning, hand-delivered by a process server who looked uncomfortable about serving eviction papers to a senior citizen. "Quitclaim deed and notice to vacate," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "You've got until Monday at noon." I read through the documents. Standard legal language, but the gist was clear. Sign over any claim to the property, accept zero compensation, and get out. If I refused to sign, Tori would file for forcible eviction. My own daughter was treating me like a squatter. I called her. "Tori, we need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. You sign, you leave, we move on. I raised you in this house. Your mother died in this house." "Don't!" Her voice went sharp. "Don't you dare use Mom's memory to manipulate me. I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm asking for basic human decency." "Decency?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad, you've lived in my house rent-free for 6 months. I've been patient, but I have a life to build, and I can't do it with you as dead weight." Dead weight. That's what 30 years of parenting had earned me. Where am I supposed to go, Tori? Figure it out. You're a smart guy, right? You're always talking about how you invented this or designed that. Time to prove it. The mockery in her voice cut deep. She'd been listening to those stories her whole life, how Daddy had patents and prototypes and big ideas that never quite panned out. To her, I was just a basement dreamer who never amounted to anything. I need more time. "You've had 62 years. Sign the papers, Dad. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She hung up. I sat in my empty living room. Tori had already moved out the good furniture and tried to process what was happening. My daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with calculus homework, was throwing me away like garbage. But there was something else, something in her voice. The way she'd said, "You're always talking about how you invented this or designed that." Like she'd heard those stories from someone else recently, like someone had been preparing her to dismiss my claims. That's when my phone rang again. Unknown number. "Mr. Brennan, this is Grace Martinez. I'm an intellectual property attorney. I think we need to talk." "I'm sorry, I've been researching the Brennan Dynamics patent portfolio. There are some irregularities that might interest you. Specifically, prior art that predates the company's founding by several years." My heart started pounding. What kind of irregularities? The kind that could invalidate some very valuable patents, the kind that could prove the rightful inventor was someone else entirely. I looked around my soon-to-be former living room, at the family photos Tori hadn't bothered to take, at the walls that held 30 years of memories. "Can you meet tomorrow?" "I'll be there." After I hung up, I went down to my workshop one more time. To say goodbye, I thought, to pack up the last of my tools and prototypes. Instead, I found something that would change everything. That call changed everything. Grace Martinez met me at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. Mid-40s, sharp suit, the kind of lawyer who charges by the minute and earns every penny. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be direct. I've been hired by a client to investigate potential patent infringement involving Brennan Dynamics. During my research, I found something unusual." She opened a folder and spread out papers. Patent documents, technical diagrams, filing dates. "These are the core patents that built Brennan Dynamics. Filed between 2004 and 2005, they covered wireless communication protocols that became industry standard, worth hundreds of millions in licensing fees over the years." I nodded. I knew the patents. I'd seen Patrick present them to investors. "Here's the problem," Grace continued. "I found prior art, patents filed by someone else years earlier, covering the same innovations." She slid another set of documents across the table. My hands started shaking before I picked them up. There was my name, William J. Brennan, J. Filed with the USPO between 1997 and 2003, 7 years before Patrick founded his company. "These are your patents, aren't they?" I couldn't speak. I just stared at the documents. My documents, filed when Tori was in high school, when I still believed hard work and innovation were enough.
How is this possible? I finally managed. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Your patents cover the fundamental technology behind Brennan Dynamics' entire product line. If these are valid, then every product Patrick's company ever made was built on your intellectual property. But he sold the company. It's gone. Grace smiled. Mr. Brennan, companies can be sold, but patents live forever. And if fraud was involved in transferring your patents to Brennan Dynamics, we can challenge everything. The sale, the licensing deals, everything. She pulled out her laptop and started typing. I'm accessing the USPTO database now. Let me check the current status of your patents.
As she worked, I thought about those long nights in my workshop, soldering circuits, writing code, documenting every innovation in my engineering notebooks. I'd been so careful, so thorough, every prototype labeled and dated, every breakthrough recorded. Here we go, Grace said, turning the laptop toward me. Your patents are still active, still valid, and according to this, they were never formally transferred to anyone. That's impossible. Patrick used them to build his company. Then he used them illegally. Mr. Brennan, your patents predate the company by 7 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. Patrick founded... Grace held up the original filing document. My signature was clear as day, dated March 15, 1999. 5 years before Patrick ever incorporated Brennan Dynamics. Mr. Brennan, if what I'm seeing here is accurate, you're not just entitled to compensation. You own the fundamental technology behind a multi-hundred-million-dollar industry. But the company was sold for $33 million. That was just the sale price. The total value, including licensing fees, subsidiary companies, and current market valuation of the technology, is much higher. We're talking about hundreds of millions in damages. I felt dizzy. How much higher? Grace pulled up another screen. Financial reports, market analysis, licensing agreements spanning 20 years. Conservative estimate? The company and its technology are worth at least $200 million. If we can prove fraud in the patent transfer, you're entitled to recover damages going back to when the theft occurred. $200 million. I'd been living like a poor man while my brother built an empire on my work, while my daughter inherited wealth that should have been mine. What do I need to do? First, we need to gather evidence. Original prototypes, engineering notebooks, anything that proves you were the actual inventor. Then we file a preliminary injunction to freeze any remaining assets while we sort this out. I thought about my workshop. 25 years of documentation, sitting in boxes in my basement. I have everything. Prototypes, notebooks, photographs, time-stamped files. I never throw anything away. Perfect. We'll need to move fast. If Tori starts spending that inheritance or transferring assets, it gets harder to recover. She already bought herself a new house, cars, started talking about investing in other companies. Grace's expression hardened. Then we file tomorrow. Mr. Brennan, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about money. What happened to you was theft on a massive scale. Your brother didn't just steal your inventions. He stole your legacy. We spent the next hour going through documents, timelines, evidence requirements. When we finished, Grace handed me her card. Go home and gather everything. Every prototype, every notebook, every scrap of documentation. We're going to build a case that will shock the technology industry. As I walked to my car, I thought about Tori. How she'd dismissed my stories about inventions and patents. How she'd called me deadweight. She had no idea what was coming. Grace Martinez said 4 words that left me stunned. Monday morning, Grace and I walked into federal court with 3 boxes of evidence and a petition that would freeze every dollar of Tori's inheritance. Your Honor, we're seeking a preliminary injunction to prevent further dissipation of assets while we investigate alleged patent fraud spanning 20 years, Grace told Judge Morrison. The paperwork was filed under case number CV 2024-8832. Within 6 hours, Tori's bank accounts were frozen, all $33 million, locked down pending investigation. My phone rang at 2:30 p.m. Dad, what the hell did you do? Tori's voice was raw with panic. For the first time in months, she sounded like my daughter again instead of a corporate executive. I protected my rights. Your rights? Dad, they froze everything. I can't access my accounts. I can't pay for anything. What rights? The rights to intellectual property that your uncle stole from me. That's insane. Uncle Patrick built that company from nothing. He built it from my patents. I have the documentation, Tori.
Filed years before Patrick ever incorporated Brennan Dynamics. Silence on the line. Then, you're lying. USPTO database, case number CV 2024-8832. Look it up. I could hear her typing in the background, computer keys clicking frantically. This is impossible. March 15th, 1999. Wireless Communication Protocol Enhancement. William J. Brennan, inventor. 5 years before your uncle's company existed. More typing, more silence. Even if this is real, it doesn't matter. The company was sold legally. I inherited legally. You can't just... I can if the patents were transferred through fraud. And they were. Grace had explained it to me in simple terms. If Patrick had used my patents without permission to build his company, every transaction built on that theft was potentially voidable. The sale, the inheritance, all of it. Dad, please, I have commitments. I bought a house. I made investments. People are counting on me. People like who? My financial advisor, the foundation I'm starting. I signed contracts. Something in her voice made me pause. What financial advisor? Wellington and Associates. They're helping me structure everything for maximum impact. Social responsibility, sustainable investing, that sort of thing. I'd never heard of Wellington and Associates, but the name made my stomach turn. In my experience, financial advisors who found sudden wealthy clients were usually vultures. Tori, how much have you already spent? I haven't... Look, the important thing is making the money work for good causes. How much? 8 million. But Dad, it's not what you think. These are strategic investments in 8 million. In 6 months, she'd blown through $8 million of my stolen inheritance. Jesus, Tori. Don't you dare judge me. I'm trying to build something meaningful. Unlike you, I'm not content to sit in a basement workshop my entire life accomplishing nothing. The words stung because they echoed what I'd believed about myself for 20 years. But Grace had shown me the truth. I hadn't accomplished nothing. I'd accomplished everything. I just hadn't gotten credit for it. We'll see who's accomplished nothing when this is over. Dad, you're making a huge mistake. Even if you win, which you won't, you'll destroy our relationship forever. Our relationship was destroyed when you threw me out of my own house. I hung up. Grace called an hour later with an update. The court granted our injunction, all assets frozen pending investigation. But there's something else. I've been digging into the Brennan Dynamics sale, and the numbers don't add up. What do you mean? 33 million was the reported sale price, but I'm finding evidence of subsidiary companies, licensing deals, offshore accounts. The total value looks much higher. How much higher? Still calculating, but we might be looking at 200 million or more. Your brother was either very creative with his accounting or someone's been hiding assets. 200 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like monopoly money. There's something else, Grace continued. I ran background checks on Tori's financial advisors. Wellington and Associates has some interesting clients. Companies that specialize in rapid asset liquidation for wealthy individuals who need to move money quickly. What does that mean? It means if someone wanted to hide assets before a legal challenge, Wellington and Associates would be the firm to call. A chill ran down my spine. You think Tori knows about the patents? I think someone knows, and I think they've been preparing for this fight longer than we realized. That evening, I sat in my workshop, my soon-to-be former workshop, surrounded by the evidence that would either vindicate 20 years of humiliation or destroy what remained of my relationship with my daughter. Either way, there was no going back. I'd filed the papers, frozen the accounts, drawn the battle lines. Tori could dismiss me as a basement dreamer all she wanted, but now I had the law on my side. But as I looked through my engineering notebooks, documenting innovations that had generated hundreds of millions in revenue, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something important. If Patrick had really stolen my patents, why had he acted so strangely in his final months? Why the nervous phone calls, the late-night visits to his study, the talk about unfinished business? And why did Tori sound genuinely shocked when she saw the patent dates? If she'd known the truth about her inheritance, wouldn't she have been prepared for this challenge? But someone was watching me. The showdown came 3 days later at Wellington and Associates, a gleaming office tower downtown that screamed expensive. Tori had requested a meeting to discuss terms,
which Grace warned me was lawyer speak for negotiate a settlement before things get ugly. We met in a conference room on the 15th floor. Tori sat across from me, flanked by two attorneys I didn't recognize, and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Bradley Wellington, senior partner. "Mr. Brennan," Wellington began, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. Your client inherited assets built on stolen intellectual property. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof of theft?" Grace opened her briefcase and spread out documents. Patent filings, technical drawings, photographs of prototypes, all time-stamped years before Brennan Dynamics existed. "This is proof. William Brennan is the rightful inventor of the technology that built your client's inheritance." Wellington barely glanced at the papers. "Interesting. But Miss Brennan inherited the company legally. Any disputes about the underlying patents should have been raised 20 years ago." "They couldn't be raised because Mr. Brennan didn't know his patents had been stolen." "Stolen is a strong word. Perhaps there was some confusion about family contributions to the business." I looked at Tori. She was staring at the patents with an expression I couldn't read. Confusion? Recognition? Fear? "Tori, did you know?" She looked up, and for a moment I saw my daughter instead of the cold stranger she'd become. "Dad, She started to speak, then glanced at Wellington, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Miss Brennan has been fully briefed on the situation," Wellington said smoothly. "She's prepared to offer a settlement, $2 million, plus your legal fees in exchange for dropping this frivolous lawsuit. $2 million, out of an inheritance worth hundreds of millions. That's insulting. It's generous considering the weakness of your position. Statute of limitations, Mr. Brennan. You waited too long." Grace leaned forward. "Fraud has no statute of limitations. If we can prove Patrick Brennan knowingly used stolen patents to build his company, every transaction based on that theft becomes voidable. If you can prove it. That's a big if. We have the patents. We have the prototypes. We have 20 years of documentation. You have an old man's fantasy about inventions that never mattered." The words came from Tori, and they hit like a physical blow. "Excuse me? Dad, come on. You've been telling these stories my whole life. How you invented this. How you designed that. But what did you ever actually build? What company did you ever create? You spent 40 years in a basement workshop, and what do you have to show for it?" "I have patents. Valid patents that your uncle used to..." "Uncle Patrick was a visionary. He took your basement hobby projects and turned them into something real, something that mattered. And now you want to destroy his legacy because you're jealous." "Jealous?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Tori, that man stole my life's work. He improved your work. He made it relevant. Dad, you're not an entrepreneur. You're not a businessman. You're a tinkerer who never learned how to turn ideas into reality." Wellington was smiling now, enjoying the family drama he'd probably orchestrated. "Besides," Tori continued, "even if you somehow win this lawsuit, what then? You get money you don't know how to manage, and you lose your daughter forever. Is that worth it?" I looked across the table at the woman I'd raised, who was now using our relationship as a bargaining chip. Is that a threat? "It's reality, Dad. I'm offering you a way out. Take the $2 million. Buy yourself a nice house somewhere warm. Live comfortably. But if you keep pushing this, if you try to destroy everything I've inherited, then we're done. Forever." The room went quiet. Grace touched my arm, a signal to stay calm, think before responding. I thought about 20 years of believing I was a failure. 20 years of watching Patrick get credit for my innovations while I stayed hidden in my workshop. 20 years of being treated like the family's underachiever. "Tori, I raised you to value truth, justice, family loyalty. What happened to those values?" "I grew up. I learned that good intentions don't pay bills or change the world. Money does. Power does. And if you try to take that away from me over some ancient grudge against Uncle Patrick, then you're not the father I thought you were." She gathered her papers and stood up. "The offer stands until Friday. $2 million plus legal fees. After that, we fight, and I promise you'll lose more than just a lawsuit." As she walked toward the door, I called after her. "Tori," she turned back. "Your inheritance was built on my stolen work, but what you just said to me in this room, that was your choice. When this is over, remember who chose cruelty over family." She hesitated for just a moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Doubt, regret? Then Wellington put his hand on her shoulder, and the moment passed. Friday, Dad. Don't make the wrong choice. After they left, Grace and I sat in silence for several minutes. I'm sorry you had to hear that, she finally said. Are we going to win? Legally, yes. I'm confident we can prove patent theft. But Bill, you need to understand something. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about family. And families can be harder to put back together than legal cases. I looked out the window at the city below, thinking about the little girl who used to help me in my workshop, who'd listened wide-eyed to my explanations of circuits and protocols. That little girl was gone. In her place was a stranger who valued money over truth, power over love. She said something that broke my heart completely. 2 days after the conference room confrontation, I understood why Patrick had been paranoid in his final months. Someone was watching me. It started small. A white van parked across from my house 3 days running. Phone calls that disconnected when I answered. My garbage cans knocked over, contents scattered across the driveway. Then it escalated. Thursday morning, I found my workshop door forced open. Nothing stolen, but everything searched. File cabinets rifled through, prototype cases opened, my computer powered on with files obviously accessed. I called Grace immediately. They're looking for evidence, she said, trying to figure out what we have, how strong our case is. Who's they? Good question. I'm going to call Detective Sam Rodriguez. He specializes in corporate espionage cases. Rodriguez arrived that afternoon, a weathered man in his 50s who reminded me of my high school shop teacher. He examined my workshop with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen plenty of break-ins. Professional job, he concluded. They knew what they were looking for. Went straight to your filing systems, ignored anything valuable. This wasn't random. What does that mean? It means someone's worried about what you might find, worried enough to risk a felony breaking and entering charge. That evening, Detective Rodriguez called with more disturbing news. I ran background checks on Wellington and Associates. Interesting firm. They specialize in asset protection for high net worth individuals. Translation? They help rich people hide money when lawsuits are coming. Is that legal? Depends how they do it. But here's the thing. They have contracts with several document destruction companies. Industrial shredders, the kind used to eliminate evidence. A chill ran down my spine. You think they're destroying records? I think someone's covering their tracks. Fast. He was right. The next morning, Grace called in a panic. Bill, get down here immediately. Something's wrong. I drove to her office to find her staring at her computer screen, face pale. I've been trying to access Brennan Dynamics corporate records through the state database. Everything filed before 2010 has been purged. What do you mean purged? Gone. Deleted. Original incorporation documents, amendment filings, ownership transfers, all of it. According to the database, Brennan Dynamics didn't exist until 2010. That's impossible. It's also illegal. Corporate records are public documents. They can't just disappear unless someone with access to the state database made them disappear. I felt the ground shifting under my feet. What about my patents? Grace turned to another screen. Your original patents are still there, but someone's filed counterclaims questioning their validity. Bogus claims, but it'll take months to sort out. How is this happening? Money, Bill. Serious money. The kind that buys silence, cooperation, and convenient memory lapses. She pulled up another document. I also found something else. Brennan Dynamics wasn't sold to one company. It was broken up and sold to 7 different subsidiaries, all owned by the same parent corporation. Which parent corporation? That's where it gets interesting. The parent company is registered in the Cayman Islands. Ownership is hidden behind shell companies, but the domestic agent for service is Wellington and Associates. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture wasn't pretty. You're telling me Wellington and Associates helped orchestrate the sale of the company? I'm telling you this whole thing smells like a setup. The timing, the shell companies, the document destruction. Someone planned this very carefully. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Patrick's behavior in his final months. The nervous phone calls, the late-night visits to his study, the agitated conversations about unfinished business. What if Patrick hadn't just stolen my patents? What if he'd discovered something worse? Friday morning brought the answer, delivered in the form of a phone call that made my blood run cold. The caller ID showed Tori's number, but the voice was male, calm, professional. Mr. Brennan, my name is Marcus Webb. I represent certain parties with an interest in your current legal action. Who is this? Where's my daughter? Miss Brennan is fine. She's simply unavailable to take calls at the moment. She asked me to convey a message. What message? Drop the lawsuit. Immediately. Accept the $2 million settlement. Sign the non-disclosure agreement and walk away. Or what? Or things become unpleasant for everyone involved. Is that a threat? It's a reality check, Mr. Brennan. You're 62 years old. You live alone. Accidents happen to elderly people all the time. Falls downstairs. Carbon monoxide leaks. Very sad, but very common. My hands were shaking. If you hurt my daughter... Your daughter is a valued client, Mr. Brennan. As long as you make smart choices, she'll remain safe and prosperous. Make bad choices, and, well, inheritance laws can be complicated when beneficiaries die unexpectedly. The line went dead. I called Grace immediately, then Detective Rodriguez. Within an hour, both were at my house. This changes everything, Rodriguez said. Death threats, extortion, this is federal territory now. What about Tori? I'll put out a welfare check request. If she's really being held against her will, we'll find her. Grace was studying her laptop. Bill, I think I know what Patrick discovered in his final months. Look at this. She'd pulled up financial records showing the real scope of Brennan Dynamics' business. Not just the $33 million sale, but 20 years of licensing deals, subsidiary companies, international partnerships. The total value isn't $200 million, she said quietly. It's over $800 million. $800 million. Built on my stolen patents. Someone's been systematically looting the company for years, moving assets offshore, preparing for exactly this moment. Patrick must have found out. You think that's why he died? I think Patrick Brennan had a guilty conscience and started asking the wrong questions. And I think that's why your daughter's inheritance was structured the way it was, to make her a target instead of an ally. Rodriguez looked up from his phone. Welfare check came back negative. Tori's not at her address. Her neighbors haven't seen her in 3 days. The room went silent. They have my daughter. And they have 800 million reasons to keep her quiet, Grace added. I thought about Tori's words in the conference room, how she'd dismissed my inventions as basement hobby projects, how she'd threatened to cut me out of her life forever. What if she hadn't been speaking for herself? What if someone had been coaching her, preparing her, using her as a weapon against me? That call made me realize how wrong I'd been about everything. Saturday morning, Detective Rodriguez arrived with FBI agent Janet Walsh and a plan that could either save my daughter or get us all killed. We're going to wire you, Walsh explained. Full surveillance package, video, audio, GPS tracking. You're going to arrange a meeting with Wellington and whoever's really behind this. What if they refuse to meet? They won't refuse. They need you to sign settlement papers to make their problem go away, and they need to do it while they still have leverage. The leverage, of course, was Tori. Walsh opened a briefcase containing surveillance equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. Tiny cameras, wireless microphones, transmission devices no bigger than shirt buttons. The key is getting them to talk, she continued. We need admissions, confessions, evidence that ties Wellington and Associates to patent theft, extortion, and kidnapping. What about my daughter? We'll have a team standing by. The moment we locate her, we move. Grace had spent the morning researching Wellington and Associates' office building, looking for ways to place additional surveillance. Conference room 12B, she announced. That's where they held our last meeting, and according to the building directory, it's the only room large enough for the kind of meeting they'll want. Multiple parties, document signing, the works. How do you know they'll use that room? Because I'm going to suggest it. The plan was simple, maybe too simple. Grace would call Wellington, claiming I was ready to negotiate. She'd request the meeting be held in conference room 12B at 4:30 p.m., claiming I was more comfortable in familiar surroundings. Meanwhile, Agent Walsh would plant additional surveillance equipment in the room during the lunch hour, when building security was minimal. What if they sweep for bugs? They will, Walsh confirmed. But we're using the latest technology. Devices so small they'll blend into the room's existing electronics. Plus, your personal wire is undetectable as long as you don't let them search you. At 2 p.m., Grace made the call. Mr. Wellington? Grace Martinez. My client has reconsidered your offer. I could hear Wellington's voice through the speakerphone, smugly confident. I'm pleased to hear that. Miss Martinez, common sense prevailing, I hope. Mr. Brennan is willing to accept the $2 million settlement with some modifications to the non-disclosure agreement. What modifications? He wants assurance that his daughter will be available for the signing. Family closure, you understand. A pause. Then, of course, family is important. Conference room 12B, 4:30 p.m. Perfect. Excellent. And Miss Martinez? Make sure Mr. Brennan understands this is his final opportunity to resolve this matter amicably. The threat was barely veiled. After Grace hung up, Agent Walsh reviewed the wire protocol one more time. Remember, we need them to admit to specific crimes. Patent theft, extortion, kidnapping. Don't be subtle. Push them to brag about how clever they've been. What if they just hand me papers to sign and leave? They won't. These people are criminals, but they're also arrogant. They've been planning this for months, maybe years. They'll want you to understand how thoroughly you've been outmaneuvered. Detective Rodriguez added the final piece. We'll have teams positioned throughout the building. The moment things go south, we're 30 seconds away. At 4 p.m., I walked into the Wellington and Associates building wearing enough surveillance equipment to film a documentary. Every word I spoke, every conversation in the room, every document placed on the table would be recorded in high definition. As I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, I thought about Tori. Somewhere in the city, my daughter was being held by people who'd killed for less than $800 million. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into the hallway that would either end with justice or tragedy. They admitted more than I dared hope. Conference room 12B looked exactly the same as our previous meeting, except this time Tori wasn't there. Instead, Wellington sat across from me with two men I didn't recognize, and a stack of legal documents thick enough to choke a horse. Mr. Brennan, before we begin, I need to ask, are you wearing any recording devices? My heart hammered, but Agent Walsh had prepared me for this. Of course not. I just want this nightmare to end. Good, because what we're about to discuss is highly confidential. Wellington gestured to the man on his left. This is Marcus Webb, who I believe you spoke with yesterday. He represents the current owners of Brennan Dynamics' intellectual property portfolio. Webb smiled without warmth. Mr. Brennan, I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable. Where's my daughter? Safe, comfortable, eager to see this resolved so she can get back to her life. I want to talk to her. Soon. First, let's handle the paperwork. Wellington opened the document stack. Standard settlement agreement. You acknowledge that you have no valid claim to any patents or intellectual property connected to Brennan Dynamics. In exchange, you receive $2 million and agree never to discuss this matter publicly. I picked up the first page and pretended to read while listening for any admission that could help convict these bastards. This seems straightforward, I said. But I'm curious. How did you know I'd eventually challenge the patents? Webb and Wellington exchanged glances. Your brother told us, Webb said. My blood turned to ice. Patrick told you? Patrick Brennan discovered some irregularities in the company's patent portfolio about 8 months before he died. He came to us asking questions about ownership, transfer documents, that sort of thing. And? Wellington leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the story. We explained to Patrick that certain adjustments had been made over the years to optimize the company's intellectual property position. Nothing illegal, you understand, just creative corporate structuring. What kind of adjustments? Well, for instance, we discovered that some of the patents the company was built on had originally been filed by someone else, a basement inventor who never properly monetized his work. Webb picked up the narrative. Patrick was concerned about potential legal challenges, especially from family members who might feel entitled to something, so we developed a comprehensive strategy to protect the company's assets. What strategy? First, we moved the real assets offshore. The $33 million sale to your daughter. That was just the domestic shell company. The real value, the patents, the licensing deals, the international subsidiaries, all owned by entities beyond the reach of U.S. courts. Wellington opened his laptop and turned it toward me. Financial documents showed a complex web of companies, trusts, and offshore accounts. Total value of the actual intellectual property portfolio? $847 million. $847 million. I kept my face neutral while inside I was screaming. Patrick agreed to this? Patrick was a pragmatist. He understood that protecting assets sometimes requires creative interpretation of ownership laws. Webb smiled. Of course, Patrick also understood that if certain information became public, it could be personally embarrassing, even criminal, so he agreed to some additional precautions, such as insurance policies, life insurance specifically, very large policies with very specific beneficiaries. My stomach turned. You killed him. Patrick Brennan died of a heart attack, stress, poor diet, age-related factors. Very sad, but entirely natural. But you caused the stress, Wellington shrugged. Business can be stressful, especially when you're hiding the fact that your entire empire was built on stolen intellectual property. There it was, a clear admission of patent theft, recorded in high definition. But Webb wasn't finished. The beautiful thing about our approach is that it's completely legal. Your patents were filed individually, but the company was incorporated with different ownership structures. No direct theft occurred, just creative reinterpretation of who owned what. And Tori, what's her role in this? Your daughter is the perfect front, young, idealistic, genuinely believing she inherited legitimate wealth. She has no knowledge of the underlying structure, which makes her testimony credible if anyone ever questions the inheritance. But you've been coaching her, turning her against me. Webb laughed. We didn't need to coach her, Mr. Brennan. We just told her the truth, that her father was a failed inventor trying to steal credit for someone else's success. She believed it because she'd watched you fail her entire life. The words cut deep, but I forced myself to stay focused. These admissions were gold for the prosecution. What happens after I sign these papers? You disappear, Wellington said simply. $2 million buys a nice retirement in a country without extradition treaties. You live quietly and everyone stays happy. And if I don't sign? Webb's smile vanished. Then your daughter's inheritance becomes even more substantial. Tragic accidents happen to elderly men who live alone. But the biggest twist was still coming. Actually, there's something else you should know, Wellington said, reaching into his briefcase. Patrick left something for you before he died. A final gift, you might say. He pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, my name written in Patrick's familiar handwriting. He made us promise to give this to you if you ever challenge the patents. Call it his insurance policy. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated 3 days before Patrick's death, written in the shaky handwriting of a man fighting both cancer and conscience. Bill, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm gone without making things right. The cancer gave me 3 months to find the courage I should have had 20 years ago. Wellington and Associates has been blackmailing me since 2019. They discovered the patents were yours and threatened to expose everything unless I cooperated with their asset protection scheme. I was a coward. I chose my reputation over your rights. But I kept records. Everything. The original patent theft, the corporate restructuring, the offshore accounts, the death threats. It's all documented and hidden where only you can find it. The basement workshop at 1247 Maple Drive. Behind Mom's old photo on the east wall, there's a safe. Combination is Tori's birthday, 0312199. Something. Inside you'll find everything you need to reclaim what was always yours. I tried to tell you during my last visits, but they were watching. I couldn't risk your safety until I was gone. The truth is, you were always the genius, Bill. I was just the salesman who stole your dreams and sold them as my own. But I also kept them safe. Every innovation, every breakthrough, every dollar earned, it's all documented in that safe. Wellington thinks they own me even in death. But I built one final protocol they never knew about. If anything happens to you or Tori, everything gets released automatically to the FBI, the Patent Office, and every major technology journalist in the country. I'm sorry it took cancer to give me backbone. I'm sorry you had to wait 20 years for justice. But I made sure you'd get it. Your brother, Patrick P.S. Tori doesn't know anything. They've been using her as an unwitting front. When this is over, she'll need her father. I looked up at Wellington and Webb, who were watching me with growing alarm. You knew about this letter? Patrick was rambling toward the end, Wellington said dismissively. Cancer medications, you know. Makes people paranoid. He mentioned a safe. Webb leaned forward. Mr. Brennan, whatever Patrick might have claimed to document, I assure you it won't hold up in court. Hearsay from a dead man isn't evidence. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Actually, gentlemen, Patrick was smarter than you gave him credit for. He wasn't just documenting your crimes, he was recording them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small device Agent Walsh had given me. This conversation has been broadcast live to the FBI. Agent Walsh, Detective Rodriguez, and about 6 federal prosecutors have been listening to every word you've said for the past 30 minutes. The color drained from Wellington's face. That's impossible. We swept this room. You swept for bugs planted in the room. You didn't check for signals broadcast from outside the building. Webb started toward the door, but it opened before he reached it. Agent Walsh entered with 4 federal marshals. Gentlemen, you're under arrest. Patent fraud, extortion, conspiracy, and kidnapping. Mr. Brennan, thank you for your cooperation. As they handcuffed Wellington and Webb, I thought about Patrick's letter. 20 years of believing my brother had betrayed me, when he'd actually been protecting what he'd stolen, waiting for the right moment to give it back. Everything I thought I knew about Patrick was wrong. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of the Brennan Innovation Foundation, looking out at the Portland skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The foundation's offices occupied 2 floors of a building I now owned, funded by the $400 million settlement from the government seizure of Wellington and Associates' offshore accounts. Tori walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, moving with the quiet confidence she'd recovered since the FBI found her in a safe house in Seattle, unharmed but thoroughly shaken by learning the truth about her inheritance. The first batch of grant applications came in, she said, handing me a cup. 12 young inventors, all with patents filed, but no capital to commercialize their work. What do you think? I think we fund all 12. That's what the foundation is for, making sure the next generation of innovators doesn't get robbed like you did. Our relationship had required careful rebuilding. Tori carried guilt about the things she'd said during those final months when Wellington's people had been systematically poisoning her view of me. I carried my own guilt about letting pride keep me silent for 20 years, but we were building forward, not backward. Dad, I need to ask you something. What? Do you forgive Uncle Patrick? I thought about the letter, about the safe hidden behind Mom's photo, about the 20 years of documentation Patrick had kept, knowing someday it would restore my legacy. I think Patrick spent his last months trying to undo 20 years of cowardice. That's more than most people would do. And me? Do you forgive me? I looked at my daughter, 30 years old, brilliant, idealistic despite everything she'd been through. Tori, you were used by criminals who exploited your love for family and your desire to do good in the world. There's nothing to forgive. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since before Patrick died. The reporter from TechCrunch wants to interview you about the foundation next week. Set it up, and make sure they know we're looking for more inventors who need support. As Tori left to make the arrangements, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Foundation's website. The mission statement was simple: protecting innovation, supporting inventors, ensuring that genius gets credit. Below that, a quote from my first public interview. If you've ever had someone steal credit for your work, share your story in the comments. And remember, real talent always finds a way to shine.